Welcome to Heads and Tails. I'm Henry Faber, one of the founders at Oppidan, and I'm thrilled to have Joe Seddon joining me today for a chat. Joe is a tech entrepreneur with a seriously exciting social mission that I am super into. He's a more handsome, successful young entrepreneur than me, and he's the founder of Zero Gravity, which is a tech company supporting low-income students into universities and careers. And in October 2020, Joe was also appointed a trustee of the British Youth Council. I believe he's also a governor of Leicester Community School, but he can tell me if I'm wrong on that. Joe, thank you so much. Really, really pleased to have you with us and excited to hear some of your insight on this whole educational landscape. So thank you. I thought I'd start with mentoring because we're all about mentoring. Have you had a mentor in your own life, someone specific? Love to hear a bit more of your perspective on what mentoring has meant to you growing up.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Henry. I've had a number of mentors throughout my crazy journey to this point. So my first real mentor in life, I think, was my grandma. So I grew up in a single parent background in a small town in West Yorkshire. And I was really close to my grandma, who was someone who inspired me to look beyond what I was doing at school. She gave me loads of interesting things to read. She inspired my passion in sort of politics and economics, and if it wasn't for her, I never would have applied to a university like Oxford, for instance, and never for a degree like PPE. So I think sometimes the greatest mentors can come out of just a family or a friendship situation. You don't necessarily have to go out and rationally calculate how to find the best mentor. That being said, as I sort of progressed from education into the crazy world of startup, I had a couple of different kinds of mentors who were people who were completely outside of my family and friendship network. But again, often they came from very strange places. I met one of the most important mentors, who was actually the first investor in my company, in a pub in North London. It was almost a completely coincidental way to meet. It wasn't calculated in any way, but that guy is a guy called Bill Westwater, became the first investor in my company, first chair of the board, and in many ways taught me everything that I know now about how to sort of grow an early stage company.
That's awesome. That's really great. Do you think you were aware of what good mentorship really was in kind of like a formal sense before starting on the zero gravity journey?
I think in many ways, mentoring is actually quite simple fundamentally, which is at the core of a great mentoring relationship, you need a resonance between mentor and mentee. Often with the best mentors I've got they're almost friends as much as they are mentors, although they're people who I feel able to open up to bring problems to. And to be able to do that, you have to fundamentally have a level of sort of trust and understanding with a person. So you should never have a mentor who you don't fundamentally get on with. Like, you can potentially have a therapist or a career coach who you don't necessarily completely resonate with, but when it comes to mentorship, I think you have to have somebody who you resonate with. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's exactly the same as you, but there has to be that underlying personal bond.
I agree. And what gave you that initial buzz to want to work in education?
I think I'd seen how important education was to my own life. I kind of lived the sort of traditional academic social mobility journey. Growing up in a single parent family in a small town, I went to state schools, and I got an offer and a place to study at Oxford University, where I studied PPE, and that was completely crazy for someone from my sort of area and background to do. Actually, I think in the year that I graduated from Oxford, not a single person in my local authority got an offer to study at Oxford. So it's a pretty dramatic in terms of admissions, but it was a life-changing opportunity for me because suddenly I had the sort of badge of having been to Oxford University on my sort of CV or LinkedIn profile, which gave me sort of credibility, opened doors, and I built a network of people I would never otherwise meet. Did a bit of work at university as well, which hopefully did boost some of my skills. It wasn't all just drinking and having fun, but going to Oxford opened me up to a world of opportunity and kind of made me realise also just how uneven the playing field is in the UK. Like, before I got to Oxford, I never really interacted with people who'd been to private schools before, never interacted with people who came from kind of the families of very affluent people, or people who sort of lived in nice houses in West London. So that kind of was a massive eye-opener. I saw the inequality firsthand, and I wanted to do something about it. So that's what inspired me to get into education.
That all makes great sense. And those early days, did you know that zero gravity was going to look like what it does now, or has it iterated from something very different? I'd love to hear a bit more about that journey, why you set it up, which you've kind of explained, but also what those early stages look like.
Well, right from the beginning, I did have a vision that I wanted to find a way to unleash social mobility through the power of technology. And I always believed that if we built the incredible technology that could support people into top universities and careers, it could become a product that supported tens of thousands of people, not just a couple of hundred people. So in many ways, that vision was there right from the beginning. But at the same time, I started up in my bedroom with the last 200 quid of my student loan. And although that's an incredibly romantic story to talk about now, the brutal reality of it was really difficult at the beginning because I was so resource constrained. I did spend a lot of the first 6 months just sort of banging my head against the wall thinking, no, how can anyone scale a business unless they have a huge amount of resources? And I think the dark truth is it is very difficult to grow a business if you don't have access to capital, a great network, and a lot of experience. And I faced that firsthand. But at the same time, even though it is very difficult, it's not impossible. And actually being really resource constrained is what spurs innovation in creativity in many ways, because you can't afford to follow the same paths of other people who've got more resources than you. So I don't regret for a minute having to start this business with the final 200 quid of my student loan. If anything, I think it made me think right from the start, like, how can I do things differently and try and disrupt this sector?
God, how exciting. And the first people who got on board with you, what did that look like? You started bringing people in on the mission?
Well, I started off very informally, actually. Like, I launched the business by posting on my own Facebook page, like back when Facebook was a thing, and that's what the undergraduates and young people wanted to use. And it was that actual post that led to our first sort of organic, like semi-viral traction. The most incredible thing at the beginning was actually seeing people use the platform. I think when you start something for the very first time, you almost labor a slight suspicion of, no, is this good? Is anyone actually going to use this? Seeing people actually use the product and benefit from it was incredible. And when that very first person kind of reported back in saying that I've got an offer to study at Cambridge University and I'm from a low income background, and this journey I've been on your platform has fundamentally transformed my life, like, that was a massive moment for me, because I was like, wow, it is possible to really have a massive impact, even starting off a business from the bedroom. So hearing some of those stories of people who'd really defied the odds was what really sort of spurred me on, and also sort of introduced me to the idea that building a business doesn't have to always be about strategy or building the very best business plan in the world. Actually, the power of stories is so important, and having some of those really early success stories of people who'd really defied the odds and were willing to kind of become evangelists for the platform, that is what really brought the concept to life for a lot of people and enabled us to get where we are today.
So kind of like a street speak for the consumer to like really quickly understand exactly what you were getting at. I like that. I suppose outside of your business, you've grown an amazing awareness of the social mobility landscape more broadly, or I would assume. What key changes do you think you'd probably make to our system if you were looking to drive social mobility outside of what you're doing in the education space?
I think there's been a category error in how people have regarded social mobility historically. I think historically social mobility has been seen as a charitable / philanthropic issue. I think a lot of employers, universities and schools have treated it as almost like a box ticking exercise, and let's show that we care about this issue. Let's do a couple of things, but let's not really hold our feet to the fire on the impact we can create. And that in many ways is a characteristic of how a lot of people have treated charitable issues over the generations. It's been treated in a very tokenistic way. But I think social mobility is ultimately an economic issue as much as a social one. That every single developed economy is facing a space race for talent. That unemployment is at historic lows, and yet most countries are really struggling with productivity. If we don't find better ways to fully utilize talent from across every single part of society, the developed economies are going to run into real issues. So social mobility isn't about just doing something nice that looks good in a leaflet. It's actually about making sure that businesses, universities, and the education system as a whole is able to fully utilize talent. And that's an economic issue just as much as a social one. And I think this is similar to the way that people regarded the environment. Now, 30 years ago, people regarded climate change, issues of sustainability, renewable energy as tokenistic issues. Everyone spoke about it, but no one actually did anything tangible about it. That's radically changed now. The environment is a massive growth driver for governments and businesses, and indeed a load of massive businesses have grown in this space. Tesla, for instance. I think social mobility is on a similar trajectory, and it's now moving from an issue that has historically been charitable but is increasingly economic.
Love that. I love that. And if you were a nice Ned position advising government on what they were going to do, what would you like to see? Any practical things that you think actually this is being done really badly, and I'd like to see something really tangible happen?
I think often government can only see what's in front of it, which often means that answers to social mobility are about doing things differently in the classroom or as part of university admission systems. And I think there's certainly a role there for reform, but I would encourage the government to look outside the classroom. The Generation Z spend just as much screen time on their phone as they do in the classroom nowadays. So if you don't have something that works and impacts people outside the classroom, you're actually not reaching people in 50% of their waking hours. So I think government should look at what can it do to boost social mobility outside the school system. Can it help build a digital platform to connect people with mentors? And can it find a way to collaborate with people across various industries to create incredible content? It doesn't have to be delivered by school teachers in the classroom. It could be delivered through the lens of TikTok. So I think sort of looking outside the classroom is a key thing that the government needs to do, but often the government doesn't have expertise in, which is why I think sort of trying to find a better way to do public-private partnerships with organisations such as my own is a good direction to be looking in.
Amen to that. How about universities? It's been a really well documented and pretty public kind of progression, I suppose, towards universities putting a greater focus on the social makeup of their intake. What comments do you have on that, and what do you think the direction of travel looks like in the next few years?
There has been change over the past 10 years, but we started off from such a low starting point that it's almost not that impressive, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done. I think that the most radical change over the past 5 years in particular has been at Oxbridge, and the reason for that is that there was a huge amount of media pressure on Oxford and Cambridge University to change the way their admission system worked. I think in the UK and across the globe, I suppose, there's a huge sort of fascination and fetishization of Oxbridge as an institution, and that does make people look at it more closely as a kind of as a social organisation. But actually, looking outside Oxbridge, the rest of the highly selective universities, a number of those universities actually perform worse when it comes to demographic statistics than Oxbridge. Now, I won't name any names, but there's a lot of universities that have a lot of work to do, and I think many of them haven't thought about this issue in a bold enough way. Like, this issue is not going to be solved by hosting a summer school or busing some academics around the country to do talks to kids in primary schools. There needs to be a far bolder approach. And again, looking outside the classroom, how can universities really leverage technology to bring their institution directly to low opportunity people through their mobile phones and laptop screens? That if you can do that, not only can you inspire people who may not even think about top universities as an option, but you can actually help them as well. They give them the tangible information and skills they need to get into these universities, rather than sell them a dream and then don't do anything to help them.
Yeah, interesting, really interesting. If you could rip up the rule book on UCAS, what would your dream kind of UCAS process look like?
I think the UCAS system is about to get massively disrupted. There's already the change for the 2024 admissions cycle where we're moving away from a personal statement to a couple of written questions. I think that's a very small step forward, so that ultimately it's going to make it easier for students to write answers without having to worry about paragraph structuring and flow, but it's not really a radical change. The people who have access to great preparation and have thought about how they can make themselves stand out to an admissions officer are still going to be massively advantaged by that system. But I think the entire system is going to get disrupted by the AI. That every school child in the UK is starting to play around with GPT-4, and that means that any sort of language-based admission system is now going to be really prone to being gamed. And the people are looking at that as if it's going to introduce some kind of new unfair advantage or plagiarism. But that's what affluent people have been doing for hundreds of years, right? If you've got access to a relative who's been through the system before or a paid tutor, now they can help you script your answer so it stands out to an admissions officer. And that's exactly what these new AI systems offer students. So I think the UCAS is probably going to have to move away from a language-based admission system to something else. I think what that could look like is more universities potentially moving towards standardized admissions tests. It could look like using video interview technology more. So I think it's going to be interesting because at the moment you've got Oxbridge, which has a fairly idiosyncratic interview system, and then a couple of other universities and particular departments do things a little bit differently. I think a lot of universities now are going to have to think deeply about how they do admissions because of a kind of default UCAS personal statement approach. I think it's going to come to an end over the next couple of years.
Yeah, fascinating. I could talk about that for hours with you. I think I'm big on the video side of things. I would go video heavy and like really get to know people, all their quirks and everything. But the language-based system is just, yeah. Maybe everything just goes a little bit more American in feel. That's sort of what you're describing in some ways, more of a personalized approach. But I think it's crazy the way it's done now. But back to zero gravity to kind of pull us to some kind of conclusion. You've obviously got a long-term plan and maybe some shorter-term plans. What about the next year? What is it? What's the next growth point for you guys that you're really excited about? Something you really want to achieve in 12 months' time?
Sure. So when I started this business from my bedroom a couple of years back, our first cohort of students, we had 150 students from low opportunity backgrounds who used the platform to apply to top universities. This year, we've got 10,000 students who are working their way through the university admission system. Not all of them from the bottom 40% of disadvantage, but these are students who are applying to top universities and they want to do incredible things. So seeing the scale up from 150 people per year to 10,000 has been great. And we want to continue scaling the platform to more students to serve tens of thousands of people whilst continuing to increase the quality of what we can offer. Now, the platform nowadays isn't just about providing people with the mentorship through their phone. It's about providing them with masterclass content, allowing them to tap into a community of like-minded people. And as I just referenced, we're also using a lot of AI as a business now to provide people with personalized goals, personalized plans for development. And I think there's a real opportunity to use technology to try and solve an issue which is almost as old as society itself. That the way things are is not the way things have to be. That societies have changed radically over human history in their ability to spread opportunity. And I think the upcoming technical revolution that we're moving into is another opportunity for us to reshape what the landscape looks like in terms of who gets access to the best universities and careers. So if zero gravity can be at the center of that change, that would be something that I think would be incredible and would certainly get me up in the morning.
Very eloquently put. And Joe, you're doing great stuff. Really appreciate very, very eloquent and intelligent responses to all those questions. I know it will be a great resource to anyone who tunes in or reads this, and really appreciate you sharing the time. So thanks very much.
Cheers, Henry.